ahead. We thank you for that. We know you will do that through the powerful Son that you have in Jesus Christ. We receive it. We receive it. And everybody said, amen. Amen. You may be seated. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Are you bringing that? Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Pastor John is gone for one more Sunday. Hopefully he's resting and enjoying his time off. And so it's an honor and privilege to come before you. We say this all the time, but our worship continues far beyond our singing to our acting and our obedience. And so this is also Mission Sunday. So as you sit here and you either go online and give online, if you're giving online from at home or wherever you're sitting, it's our Mission Sunday. So please keep that in mind. We want to continue to support our missionaries, and just like some of us are going through some struggles, they are definitely going through struggles from support as well as the other things that's challenging our world. And just if you didn't know, some of you that are here, you know we are still reaching far beyond what happens in this auditorium. You know you can see us on, you know you can come to our website, right? You can go to ECC Shawnee and come to the website, and you can go online and watch us. If you have Facebook, you go on Facebook and watch our services online. If you have Twitter, you can do our services on Twitter. And if you have YouTube, we are online streaming on YouTube. So we have live streaming services on 4 different platforms. And someone told me this morning in our adult class that these aren't live streaming that they're receiving, they are life streamings that they're receiving. So don't take it lightly as to the means and the vehicle in which God has blessed us with, that we might be able to reach others. And that's been our goal for years, that we go beyond the walls here and reach so many others. So it's good to see you here, and we're going to go right into the lesson or the teaching or whatever you want to call what I'm doing up here this morning. Part 2 of having eyes to see. If you were here last Sunday or watched online last Sunday, I went to John the 9th chapter and talked about the man who was born blind. Jesus' disciples confronted him with that and said, who sinned? Jesus ignored that question, went right to, this is an opportunity for God. Our struggles in many cases are not problems to God. That is not minimizing what you and what I and some of us are going through, but our struggles are not problems to God, and they're not a surprise to God. There are opportunities for Him to be magnified and glorified in our lives. And so last Sunday I also mentioned 3 types of blindness. There's the physical blindness. I talked about you can be legally blind but still have some sight. You can see shades, colors, or whatever, but so there's degrees of physical blindness. Then I shared with you there's also emotional blindness. And the term they use for that is alexithymia. Alexithymia, and that is characterized from a number of fronts. One of them is that, first of all, if you're emotionally blind, you have difficulty reacting appropriately to other people's emotions. We see a lot of that today, don't we? And it said if you're emotionally blind, you struggle with empathy or compassion. We see a lot of that today, don't we? And unfortunately, we see it through believers as well. And it talked about if you're emotionally blind, you have blind spots, just like a human eye, and that you absolutely cannot see what there is unless you move to a new position or you do something differently. I've talked to a lot of people that aren't willing to move to another position or to see or to do something differently. And that happens in our lives as a result of a number of things. Trauma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that we say no more, whatever it is, it's not going to happen to me anymore, I don't like that, and I just will shut that off emotionally in my life. And then we talked about spiritual blindness. Spiritual blindness, and that's where Jesus came in his conversation in John the 9th chapter, and he confronted them. And so when he did that, and the Pharisees finally had a chance to have that conversation, and they said, are we blind also. And I challenged all of us last week to leave out of here and be willing to ask God that question. Am I blind also? Because if we refuse to do that and don't do that, we're like the Pharisees, because Jesus said, if you say that you see, then yes, you're blind. And so here we go, we find ourselves for today in Mark the 8th chapter. In Mark the 8th chapter, we're going to go into the spot where Jesus heals another blind man. But you guys know me, and I like to give a little bit of the background before we get to the actual text. I want to set this up for you, if I may. And in setting this up, in Mark the 8th chapter, the first verse, it reads like this. It says, in those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude. We can stop right there for a moment. Emotional blindness, lack of compassion. Jesus, seeing the multitude and recognizing that they're hungry, they have nothing to eat, he said to his disciples, I have compassion for them. And he said, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. You would think that if you're hanging with Jesus 3 days, you know you're getting fed, right? You know you're getting spiritual food, right? You're with the Son of God 3 days, and hunger should not even be a part of your thought process. You're with Jesus. We've had a great service. We can have a service for 10 hours. Why should we be concerned that you're tired? But for some reason, Jesus said, you know what? They've hung with me for 3 days. And in those 3 days, they haven't had anything to eat. And I feel for them. I have compassion for them. And we need to do something. And he says this in the 3rd verse. And if I send them away hungry on the way, for some of them have come from afar. That right there, I could preach a sermon on. That right there, spending time with Jesus, recognizing your physical need, understanding what you went through to be with me, and that the distance you got to go to be a part of what I'm doing. And Jesus wrapped all that together and confronted his disciples. And his disciples simply said this in that 4th verse. He said, then his disciples answered and said, how can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? It's like there's no Hy-Vee, Jesus. There's no Burger King, Jesus. There's no fish and chips. How are we going to satisfy this multitude in the wilderness? And this is a very stupid question. I'll tell you a little bit later why that's a stupid question. And so Jesus said, what do we have? And they said to him, we've got 7 loaves of bread. He took that, had them sit down, and he began to thank God for the bread. He said, what else do we have? They said, we have some fish. And he blessed the fish, and he began to feed the people. That was good right there. But then he leaves and goes to join his disciples, and here comes the Pharisees. You got to love if the Pharisees were never there, we would never know what God was thinking, what God wanted to speak. They were the ones that drew out of Christ what we needed to hear, the mind of God, particularly when it comes to how we react and we treat others. And so the Pharisees come along and said, you know what? Show us a sign. Show us a sign from heaven. And the scripture said, he sighed deeply, or he was provoked. I'm not going to say what I said last week, but Jesus was not happy, because here they come again looking for something to prove that you're the Son of God. And so Jesus ignores them. He says, you're not going to see a sign. You're not going to see a sign. How many of us today are looking for that sign? God, what are you doing? What is that sign that you're doing that I'll know that I'm on the right side of this issue? How do I know? Because, you know, we're regardless if we think it or not, we choose sides. We choose sides. And we're looking for God, what is that sign that I'll know that I'm right and the rest of them are wrong? But Jesus ignored them. And he goes and he gets in the boat. And Jesus gets in the boat with his disciples. And here's what he finds. in the 14th verse, I don't know if it's showing on there, but I'm just going to run through it real quick. It says, now the disciples have forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Imagine this, because when Jesus fed the people, the multitude, he had baskets of food left over. The disciples forgot to bring, this is important, the disciples forgot to bring bread on the boat. So here they are on the boat. Jesus comes on, and he hears them discussing, you know, Peter, you forgot the bread. No, Andrew, you did. Somebody was supposed to get it. What is John doing? He's always hanging around, didn't he? Somebody forgot to do a very practical and menial task. Everything around Christ wasn't super spiritual. Everything around Christ wasn't he lived a practical, everyday life. And that's exactly what he expects us to do. When we get up there, we miss down here, and we miss the very practical things of they're hungry, and I don't want to send them all the way home with nothing to eat. And so Jesus said to them, as they are discussing not having enough bread for their trip, Jesus tells them this. He says, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. That just came out of the clear blue. But the disciples said, oh, now he's talking about the bread that we forgot to bring. Think about this. We're going somewhere. We're going somewhere. And so Jesus understood that they missed the boat. He understood that they did not understand. They did not see. They did not see. They did not. And when we don't see, we can say some of the stupidest things. We can react in some of the stupidest ways because we think we see, but we don't. And Jesus said, they don't see it. They don't get this. And so he says here, and once again, I don't have these scriptures up there because this is not even my main point. I'm just getting somewhere. But he says in 17, but Jesus being aware of it and said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not? Well, what in the world is he talking about? What in the world? What are you talking about, Jesus? We have no bread. We're hungry. You fed them. How are we going to eat? And he says, do you not see or understand? And here's what he did. This is the coolest thing to me, the coolest thing. The 19th verse, he says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, oh, wait a minute, the one I just read to you that just took place wasn't the first time? It wasn't the first time? Jesus said, when I broke the bread, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments were left over? The disciples said, well, 12. He said, also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets were left over? Well, 7. How many times has God come through for you? Way before COVID-19, way before issues in our society. How many times has God come through for you and you're asking him what's going on now? Or can you handle this now? Man, them disciples had to be like, whoa. Whoa, Jesus. Think about this. He fed 4,000. There wasn't a Hy-Vee or a Burger King. They asked the very same question they asked when he fed the 5,000. He did the very same thing he did with them, and they're still freaking out. I have seen and heard so many believers freaking out. It's amazing to me. As if God has gone on vacation, as if he's left, if he doesn't know what's going on. So many are freaking out. And Jesus, he said to them in the 21st verse, how is it you do not understand? How is it? How is it? with all the craziness around the world today, all the uncertainty and all the fear, how is it that we can't trust God now? What's happened? Did we not see, if nothing more figuratively speaking, did we not see the 5,000 fed in our lives, in our family, in others? Did we not see the 4,000 fed in our lives, in our family, and others? What's going on now that we don't see? What's going on now? He said simply this: having eyes to see, you do not see, and having ears to hear, you do not hear. Proverbs, the 20th chapter, the 12th verse simply says this. Proverbs 20:12 says, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord has made them both. Do not love sleep, lest you come to poverty. Open your eyes, and you will be satisfied with bread. I don't know if I gave you the Message version or not. Did I do that? The Message says it this way: ears that hear and eyes that see. We get our basic equipment from God. Don't be too fond of sleep or laziness or complacency. You end up in the poorhouse. Wake up, get up, then there will be food on the table. Did you know we're food the world needs to be eating? We're fruit the world needs to be receiving. If we look, act, and talk like them, what are they going to get from us? What are they going to get from us? And so we need our minds transformed if we're going to see what God is doing. And I will tell you this: God expects you to engage your mind. That's how we love God. That's how, if you're going to be changed and I'm going to be changed, it's going to be a transformation of what? Our minds. What is that? That's how we think. That's how we see. There's a quote that I just love. It said, the eyes are useless when the mind is blind. And if our minds are blinded by the world, our eyes still can't serve us the way God wants us to be served. Now, to the very heart of what I wanted to share with you. So Jesus then, in the 22nd verse, comes to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. And in doing so, he said, he took the blind man by the hand and he led him out of town. John, the 9th chapter, Jesus confronted with the blind man, spits on the ground, makes a wad of mud from his saliva, put it on the blind man. He sees. Jesus, in this case, sees the blind man, and what's the first thing he does with him? He takes him out of town. He takes him out of town. Jesus had to take him out of his environment. Jesus had, now you got to believe, you got to know, you don't have to believe this, you know this. He had the power to instantly heal that man right where he was. He had the capacity to be totally set free right then and there. But for some reason, Jesus took him out of his environment. I think some of the reasons some people can't see because they're in the wrong environment. Teach it now. Teach it. And you can make that whatever you want to make that for your life. That could be physically, that could be spiritual, that could be emotionally, that could be anything. But sometimes the environment we're in will prevent us from seeing what God is doing. And Jesus takes him out of his environment, out of his surroundings, out of where he was, and he took him away. What about you? What about me? What barriers could be in your life that's preventing you from seeing what God has for you? Could your present environment be that he can't speak to you in the way he needs to speak to you? Could it be preventing you from the very deliverance, from the very healing, from the very seeing that you need to have in your life? What's blocking your blessing? Jesus took him out of his environment, out of the city. And when he did that, he spit on his eyes, put his hands on him, and asked him if he saw anything. Now, for those of us that when we read the scripture and we figure that this is how God does things, we would have expected him to spit on the ground, make some mud, take the mud, put it on his eyes, and he's healed instantly. We put him in a box. We put him in a box. Moses, you speak to the rock. I got it. No, Moses, you hit the rock. I got it. Next time around, Moses, you speak to the rock. No, last time, our last service, you did this. And I think that's what you really meant for me to do. I'm going to hit the rock again. Gosh, I didn't tell you to do that. I didn't tell you to do that. Be careful. Be careful to don't put God in a box. He is not that God. Jesus didn't make mud. He didn't make mud out of the clay, out of his spit. But he spit in his eyes. And so the interesting thing about that is he spit in his eyes. He did something different. And you can hear today as churches and organizations trying to figure out what God is doing and what they can do. And you can hear everything from, churches can only meet like this, and if we only meet like this, this is what God intended, to way over here on the other side, to where, the technology, that's not church, that's not God. It's almost as if Jesus being a carpenter in his day, the technology he was using to be a carpenter, they would have said to him, you can't do that. You can't use the latest technology to be a carpenter. You got to use, I don't know what they did before him. You got to use that, whatever that is. Think about that. Think about that. I mean, why limit God? Because of this. Because of this. It's the craziest thing. It's like, I don't know. I'm not going to, but think about it. God will use whatever means necessary to get his message out. And I'm going to just say this this has got nothing to do with it, but I think I told you, talking in Sunday school here a few Sundays back, and the Roman government, abusive, oppressive, killing Christians. Jesus comes along, and the first thing they thought Jesus was going to do was what? Free them of oppression. Free them of oppression, of the government, of the control. Jesus went right in there and said, show them to me. I'm going to knock him out of office. Show them to me. I'll run them over. Jesus said, I'm going to knock your oppressors out of. And so we got to be careful. Jesus will use whatever means necessary to get his word. And if you don't want to use it, it's fine. He's going to use it through somebody to get his word out. All right, let's go back to the healing. I'm sorry. I got off track. He spit in his eyes, and he asked the weirdest questions. So now what's going on? Are you healed? Jesus attempted to heal a man and asked him, well, are you healed? And you ever been in a service where are you healed and they're not healed? Everybody looking around, well, I guess that preacher must not be powerful because they're not healed. and he said, are you healed? Do you see anything yet? Do you see anything yet? Sometimes this is not going to come immediately, people. Sometimes this is not a drive-through restaurant where we just get it and drive through and say thank you. Sometimes the meal has to be cooked, and the cooking process, and I'm not a cook, could be long. The cooking process could be something that's tiring. The cooking, whatever God is doing in your life, it's not always going to be you push the button and it drops out of the machine. And Jesus said, what do you see? What do you see? And the 24th verse, he looked up and he said, well, I see men like trees walking. So this blind man was not the same as the other blind man. Because how would he even knew what men and trees look like? sometimes our blindness, as I said before, is not total. It's just enough to keep us from receiving what we need to receive. Sometimes our blindness is just enough to get us off track and miss what God is doing. And so Jesus, the thing about this, the man who Jesus said, so what do you see? Well, I see men who look like really trees walking around. So what he was really saying is this: my seeing is a little distorted. My seeing is a little cloudy. My seeing is a little out of focus. How's your seeing? How's my seeing? Do we think we see clearly? It could be cloudy. It could be distorted. So the 25th verse, Jesus said, and he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly. Isn't that what we want? There is no reason God doesn't want us to see what's going on clearly. There's no reason for that. It could be us. It could be us. But if nothing more, for our lives, he wants us to understand why we're here. He wants us to understand our purpose, our influence. He wants us to. And my prayer is that, God, I want to see clearly. I want to see what you're doing in this world clearly. I don't want to see it distorted. I don't want to be, all this stuff that's going on around me. All these things that's going on, all these people saying, I don't want to see it that way. I don't want to see it that way. Well, whose side are you on, Daryl? Are you on the conspiracy side? The government's not going to control. Are you just going to be subjected? I'm not on either side. I'm trying to figure out what he is doing and line up with him. That's all I want to do. And here's what he says in the 26th verse. And then he said to him, then he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell anyone in the town. John, the 9th chapter, the blind man had all this conversation with the Pharisees. Back and forth dialogue. Jesus tells this blind man, listen, don't go back to where you came from. I said earlier, what's blocking you? What's blocking your vision? What is it that God is truly saying to you need to get away from, get out of, stop being a part of, that you're still holding on to? And then he tells him this: don't go back. Don't go back. There are times when God will do a work in your life and in my life, and if we're not careful and we go back, we will lose it. We will lose it. And you know how you'll lose it? You'll lose it by sharing it with some other people who don't get it, who don't see it. Oh, no. Because most people want to keep you kind of where they have you in that comfortable. But you only do this. I've only seen you do this. So why are you trying to do that? You should really go back and do this. Most people want to keep you right where they have you in their mind. They want to steal your joy. They want to steal your blessing. Not even intentionally most of the time. They just don't know. They just don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know. But seeing what God is doing is what he has charged all of us to do and to be. Just real quickly, 2 Kings, that 6th chapter, you know about Elijah the prophet, and when the armies, when they surrounded them, when the king from Syria came to attack Israel, and they're surrounded, the city is surrounded, and the servant comes up to the man of God, arose early and went out and said, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and with chariots, and the servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? Now, how many of us, maybe not in here, feel surrounded today? You're surrounded with what the media is saying. You're surrounded with what politicians and the government are saying. You're surrounded with what the doctors are saying on this side, the other doctors on that side. You're surrounded with your expert friends on Facebook who has it all figured out, and the last thing you read is the last thing you believe. We're surrounded by all this stuff going on. I talked to a lady the other day, and she said, the attack seems to be more intense by the enemy. I said, honey, the attack has always been intense by the enemy. It's not like he's taking time off. He is not.
Here's the problem, I think. This is just Daryl. There's no scripture in this. This is just me. I think so many Christians are so distracted by so much stuff. That's why the attack is intense. I talk to more Christians that would rather talk about politics, government, media, than they talk about God. It's like, whoa. It's revealing for me to see where many people are. And I think that's part of what God is doing. He's causing us to come to grips with who we are. When it's good, when we can come together and sing, when we have a good time, all is well. We got a little issue, we got a little challenge, things aren't like they used to be. Crisis doesn't build character, they say. It reveals it. What character do we want to see coming out of us? The character of God? Or what's, because most of us, when we're even talking spiritual, we're talking spiritually through the filter of our political or ideological lenses. We have I saw it said, you can take the Bible and pretty much make it say anything you want. And you know that. You know that. The servant said, Lord, to the prophet, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And he answered and said this, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Do you know that this morning? Do you know? You're not going to change anything with your Facebook posting. You're not going to change anything, mask or no mask. You're not going to change anything on any mass scale by what you think, if it's a conspiracy or not. You're not going to change anything. But did you know this? That he who is with us is greater than he who is against us. And so the prophet said this. The prophet said, he prayed and said this, Lord, I pray, open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And he saw. Do you want to see? Or are you comfortable in where you are? And it's okay. We all are trying to get there. We're all trying to get there. The servant was worried. The servant was stressed. The servant was anxious. And there's a quote that I saw. Anxiety is mostly the product of spiritual blindness. The servant got a chance to see that they were surrounded by the mighty armies of God. Church, God hadn't left us. He's not on vacation. You're not going to overthrow anything. If our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, we need to maybe refocus our fight. Refocus our fight. Helen Keller, she was the famous blind woman. She said this, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. And some of you, I know I've got text messages and stuff and calls from my last Sunday's message. I'm not talking about you. I'm just talking about us. I'm just talking about us. I'm just talking about us. And whatever we're talking about, if it's not taking us somewhere, then why are we talking about it? If it's not, if it's not saying, God, I see all this, I hear all this, this is all, what are you saying to me? So my son would say sometimes when people would go off on other stuff and they would have this revelation or whatever, he'd look at me and say, now what? Now what? Well, it was just that I just see God, he's just revealing this. Okay, so now what? Well, and if we don't have a now what in our lives, what good is it? What good is it? I'm getting ready to end, but there's a song that just touched me back in the middle of all this stuff, and it was Jeremy Camp. And the Jeremy Camp song was Keep Me in the Moment. And I'm consulting this organization in Kansas, and they called me over because one of the employees died on the job. and it was freaking them out. And they asked me to come there just that next morning to kind of be with them. And so I get there, and I'm sitting in the car, I'm listening to Christian radio, and this song comes on, and it just struck me. It's been kind of what I've been singing and saying to myself for quite a while. And the chorus of the song, what I shared with them when I got in there was simply this. The chorus says, Lord, keep me in the moment. Help me live with my eyes wide open, because I don't want to miss what you have for me. He says, Lord, show me what matters. Throw away what I'm chasing after, because I don't want to miss what you have for me. He says, keep me in the moment. Keep me in the moment, because I don't want to miss what you have for me. And my prayer for you as well is that I don't want you to miss what God has for you. And if you get too far out there, and you're not where God is and what God is doing, you're going to miss it. I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss it. I want you to see what he has for you, and not just see, more important, I want you to be able to say, God, I'm willing to do what you called me to do. One more quote. It talks about, I just saw this the other day, ships don't sink because of the water around them. Ships sink because of the water that gets in them. Don't let what's happening around you get inside you and weigh you down. Don't do that, church. Don't do that. Listen, don't get caught up in the noise. Don't get caught up in the distractions or the smoke and mirrors, as I said the other day. Purpose to see what God is doing. And I think it's three things that's getting ready to happen. No, that's starting to happen in this world. I think there's an awakening, there's a revival, and there's a renewal. The question is, are we going to be linked up with that, or are we going to be sitting on the sidelines saying, what are you doing, God? What are you doing? Some say it's probably going to be a riot or a revolution. Call it whatever you want, but God's going to have an awakening, a revival, and a renewal. And I don't want to miss what he has for me. Everybody stand. Let's pray. Father, today, yes, your word is like a two-edged sword. So yeah, you got me as I was sharing with them. And I don't want to miss what you have for me. I don't want to be on the sideline. I don't want to be in the environment that's causing me to not receive and do what you've called me to be and to do. But Lord, I think there's many here that are watching online or that are in this auditorium that are saying the same thing. God, forgive us for getting caught up in all the noise and the distractions and not seeing what you're doing. You have given us eyes to see, and you said that transformation takes place by the renewal of our minds, and that we're to love you with all of our mind. And we purpose to do that, God. Stir us, O Lord. Stir us, O God, out of our complacency, our comfort. Stir us, O God, because we, if we're ever needed in this world, we are needed now. I thank you for it. In Jesus' precious name. Can everybody say amen? Thank you very much.